I'm Carole Taylor. On this episode of Journal, an examination of the worrisome new expansion of what it means when we talk about food security. In the good old days, actually only 9 months ago, when Journal last spoke with Lenore Newman, one of Canada's top experts in this field, much of the focus was on the effects of climate change, how our supply chains must adjust, how Canada's own agriculture would be affected. And who would have believed that Lenore would now pen an op-ed that says, "We are living in a world of sharks who don't think twice about sacrificing communities to the whim of politics." She goes on to say, an irascible US government could starve us within days, and we would have no easy alternatives. Wow. Well, this, of course, comes on the heels of our Prime Minister's remarkable speech at Davos, where he posited that a country that can't feed itself, fuel itself, defend itself, has few options. So this discussion of food security has become a lot more serious fast. What if CUSMA goes away? What if 100% tariffs were put on all of our food imports, remembering that over half of our agri-food imports come from the United States? And what if the border was temporarily closed? So what are we to do? As Prime Minister Carney has said, nostalgia is not a strategy. To help guide us in this discussion is Dr. Lenore Newman. Besides being director of the Food and Agriculture Institute at the University of the Fraser Valley, she also holds a Canada Research Chair in Food Security. Back in a moment. Dr. Lenore Newman joins us. And Lenore, I have to tell you how surprised I was when I read your recent op-ed talking about irascible US government and people who don't care about communities and they act on political whims. I mean, it was beautifully structured, but I thought, we've been talking about food security in the past, just in terms of the climate. You repositioned it in terms of our vulnerability to the US. Elaborate.
Yes, well, it's an interesting time in the world of food, and now I'm biased, I always think it's an interesting time in the world of food. But we're really seeing a global reshaping of food patterns. And it goes beyond the politics of the moment in the US. It's bigger than that. We're in a world where global trade was completely dominating food patterns. And we didn't have to think very much about food because we were sourcing it elsewhere. It was moving around the world. And that was where the focus was sitting. And then about 2008, we start to see a bit of a change, a bit of a pullback from trade that, of course, has now rapidly accelerated. And it's now clear that food sovereignty is a national security issue, in that we literally could see our supply of food choked off by numerous global powers, and we don't have to focus on just one. And so creating a food supply in country year-round for everyone is an absolute priority, while at the same time increasing our global trade of food.
So I think it's about half of our food imports are either US or through the US into Canada?
Yes, and it varies sharply. So, of course, we're never going to run out of grain. And pulses and all these, crops that we're major commodity producer on. We're self-sufficient in meat and dairy, and that's a great thing. But where we're really vulnerable is fruits and vegetables. About 90% are coming from the U.S. or Mexico here in BC. So We know this is a problem, and I've talked about it as a problem before because of impacts of climate change, and also, to be honest, in the middle of winter, we don't get the best quality because it takes too long to get things from Mexico all the way up to here. We can produce things here, and now it's more urgent than ever, and we're seeing the federal government respond to that.
And when you talked about the fact that the U.S., should they choose, could starve us within a couple of weeks, it's sort of, you wake up, this is a wake-up call, and all of a sudden when we were doing a bit of trade with China, when Trump immediately said, well, if you do a big deal with China, I'm just going to slap 100% tariffs on everything. And it makes you think, oh, he could do that if he felt like doing that.
Yes, it's totally true. And we know historically being totally reliant on other places for food is a problem. And one of the great agricultural success stories of the last 50, 75 years has been the Netherlands, because when they came out of World War II, they made a promise to their people that they would never be hungry again. And it is why the Netherlands, which is the most unlikely food powerhouse, because it's small, it's dark, the land is literally taken out of the ocean. It just shouldn't work at all, but they do produce an incredible amount of food. They're actually number 2 in terms of dollar value internationally. And that is because they realized they had a weakness. We've seen the same with Singapore, really trying to push for more food production. It's a little harder for them. Same with Israel, same with Ireland. There's sort of becoming an awakening around the world. And Canada is in a great position because we do have a lot of farmland. We also have an opportunity, and I like to not frame it as a threat, because eventually the U.S. is going to need more of our food because they're actually losing production land due to climate change. And we are well positioned to be a great source for them and for anyone else on Earth who wants an excellent product.
What do you think the outcome will be of the CUSMA negotiations as far as food's concerned?
I don't know. I don't know that I'm willing to wade into that, but I think the one thing that is being clearly signaled is that supply management is definitely a sticking point for the U.S. and for a number of other international partners. Now, of course, even the federal conservatives stand by supply management. There isn't a lot of internal appetite to change that system. I think, though, there's going to be a big pressure on that system. And that opens up both challenges for our producers in country if something changes with supply management. It also, though, opens up opportunity if something changes, in that we do know that particularly in Asia, there's a big demand for Canadian products, including the supply managed products. So there is room for us to raise production in a world after supply management, but I'm not going to wade in to say which way I think it's going to go, because in the past I have said there's some really good things about supply management. It is one of the reasons we're not worrying about a lack of dairy or chicken or eggs in a trade war, is because we produce them domestically.
Well, I think these messages that you are signaling and others are that this is a wake-up call, Canada. So fine, we have reports, and you and I talk about it, and that's just swell. But in terms of action, what should Canada be doing?
There is one action above all else that I am waiting for, and that is for the Prime Minister of this country to stand up and say food is something we're very good at. It should be one of our top priorities. We are going to launch a national strategy to make Canada the #1 food powerhouse on Earth, because we could easily do that if we had the will, and it does require the dedication and the focus of the federal government. And We saw a little of that in, you may remember the Dominic Barton report from 2017, where he highlighted the opportunity in food. And we actually hit the benchmarks in that report without even trying, barely. And next week, he's going to be speaking in Ottawa on stage, and I'll be there asking him questions. So that's exciting. He's one of my heroes. And one of the things I'm going to ask him is, do we need that again? Do we need a national vision? And I really feel we do.
And you're positioning it a little bit like, well, we decided defense, we were going to get off our chairs and actually make that an agenda for the country. We're putting money into it, people into it. So you're saying we should say, okay, agriculture, we could be known as an agriculture country.
Yeah, a superpower. And we could feed a good part of the world in a world where production is falling in some of the traditional areas. So to me, I mean, it isn't rocket science. Canada should be looking to defense, which they are. We should be stressing energy development because we're an energy superpower already. And we should be unlocking our potential as a food superpower, which we already are in some sectors, but we could do so much more so easily.
When you talk about Canada could be the breadbasket of the world, that in part is because of what's happening with climate change and what areas are geographically not going to be able to produce as much.
There is an element of that, and I used to be skeptical of that, but I never thought climate change would accelerate to this pace. And I mean, it's an ironic time to be talking about that because, of course, if I'm sitting in the seats of power in Ottawa or Washington this week, I'm really cold because it is incredibly cold there. But that's exactly what scientists said would happen, is that where it's not cold right now is in the Arctic because all the cold air is sitting over top of Washington and Ottawa. And of course, here in Vancouver, it is incredibly warm. And a lot of farmers are worried because we're supposed to go up to about 15 degrees next week. And if that happens, it'll bring out all the blossoms. And then if we get a late freeze, we're back into crop losses.
On that cheery note, we're going to take a break and be right back. Lenore, being your usual enthusiastic, optimistic person, you see the opportunity out there. Now, one of the things you made a point of, it's up to our federal government to grab this opportunity. But I read last week, they're closing down 7 of our food research facilities. Like, isn't this the time that we should be expanding?
It is true. I wasn't very happy to see that. And I think those closings will come back to haunt us a little bit. It's not like we were pouring a ton of money into that part of the system. And I think what we're hearing, there's a bit of a disconnect, that at the very high level, we've heard Mark Carney talking about the need to look at food security. And yet down the chain, we're seeing budget cuts and closures where we need to see strength. And much as we need to build the military by putting boots on the ground, it's the exact same with agricultural research. Although, because agriculture is a little interesting because it's orphaned, in that it's both a federal and a provincial, priority. And so because it's split, it can be lost a little bit. And where we see real strength is in provinces where the provincial government has really doubled down on agriculture, in some cases because it's one of their major industries. And we've seen weakness where the provincial government has just kind of said, oh, well, the feds got that covered. And,
would that be BC?
We are a challenging case, for sure, in that definitely Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, and Saskatchewan and Manitoba, I'm running out of provinces, are kind of eating our lunch in terms of agriculture. And it's really disappointing. And I got to say, I am an optimist by nature, and it's not a good period of history to be an optimist, really. It's kind of a sad time for optimists. We're a little thin on the ground. And there are days that the state of agriculture in British Columbia really tests my golden retriever-like personality.
So what's BC doing or not doing that the other provinces have got right?
To be honest, we need action. And right about now, I would take almost any kind of action that's bold. And so when I look to, if I look to Quebec, there's been significant investment in public-private partnerships on research to move them from getting 90% of their leafy greens and small fruits from outside the country to 50% now, which is a big improvement. On the prairies, we've seen Saskatchewan and Manitoba double down on investing in what they know they're good at, which is large-scale agriculture on the prairies. And so when we look at canola, which of course has been in the news, that's a win. That is a Canadian crop that was pushed forward and developed. Same with lentils. And the provincial governments pushed that. And they did it through a bit of a partnership like the Dutch do, where they empowered universities to work with industry directly and to create new crops with government standing by assisting. If I look to Ontario, they have a program where they fund the University of Guelph to be the national powerhouse in agriculture. And even Alberta, which we think of energy and oil, but their number 2 sector is agriculture, and they have been funding innovation in agriculture and attracting businesses. And of course, recently we've seen some Chinese processors, other processing companies moving into Ontario and Alberta. Here we are, sitting at Tidewater, and we have rail links to the rest of the continent, but we can also get things to Asia really quickly. Are we processing things? No, we are not. And are we funding university research in agriculture? Better keep the lights on level, and we're pretty sure the next provincial budget's going to be pretty hard on us. I'm hopeful because I know it is an issue that crosses their desk. And of course, we had this strong leadership from John Horgan on the task force and on bringing in new businesses, including expanded greenhouse and indoor growing. And here we sit in 2026. It's really the time we need to be making bold moves in agriculture.
And when you say processing, to bring it to life so that what people understand, someone growing blueberries, for instance, here, we haven't got processing here. So they cross the border down to the States, they do their processing there, then it comes back for us to finish up.
Yes, and even without the trade war, this makes no sense.
And so the province could change that.
Yes, they could.
How?
Well, the example I want to just throw out there is this year we were literally sending cranberries to Massachusetts for processing. Now, I don't even know how that makes sense. I hate thinking about it. It makes my head hurt. We could be processing all of these things right here because we literally have a land base that is huge, by the way. And I often hear the government say, well, the ALR is so small. It is so precious. 1/3 of the private land in BC is in the ALR. Only a tiny fraction of it is being used for farming. It is actually an area that is about 50% the size of all the agriculture in California. BC should be an agricultural powerhouse with so much land dedicated to one industry by law. And yet we aren't allowed to do simple things like processing on that land base. And there's a lot of that land base where the soil quality is low, and the minister herself has said this, hey, there's low quality soils. We could be targeting for value add, for processing, for taking the amazing products that we're producing in Canada, turning them into goods we can then send out to the world through our port, because we have a great port. It takes one regulatory change, as we've talked about, and I wake up in the middle of the night and the word 50-50 rule just is in my head, making me sad.
You better explain the 50-50.
So currently there is a rule put in place in 2002 that says if you want to process on the ALR, 50% of the product has to come from that farm. And this is a terrible rule that is unlike anything anywhere else on Earth, because, and you can think of the obvious problem. I mean, it basically is frozen processing, and we've seen processing plunge across the province. And this directly impacts crops. So, for example, potato industry, we're down about 70% since 2002 because potato processing has left the province because they can't build a potato processor, because if you're processing potatoes, you can't let your plant sit empty most of the year while you wait for one piece of land to produce potatoes. You have to bring them in from other places. And right across the whole sector, except for the supply managed, which is a little special, we have seen processing plunge. And we see processors come and say, I would love to set up in BC because you have energy, you have a workforce, you're near tidewater. And they run into this rule, and it stops them. And it creates a catch-22. People ask me, well, yeah, but we want to keep the land for growing. But if you don't have processing, you don't have farmers, because they have to sell their products somewhere. And if you don't have farmers, you don't have processing, because we set the system up that way. It's actually a classic catch-22. And it's hard to solve. I'll give that to the government. It's not quite, I mean, it is one regulatory change, but the trick is there is this hesitancy to touch the ALR. Well, after 50 years, with plunging farm numbers in BC, we're losing 1% of our farm businesses a year. With acreage that is literally sat fallow for 50 years, it's time to touch the ALR. It is time to unleash its potential to generate food and jobs and productivity at a time when this country really needs it. And at this point, I will literally stand on stage behind any politician of any stripe that helps us actually produce food in BC, because it shouldn't be this hard.
And a lot of people will be standing with you. Thank you, Lenore, for keeping up the fight and making us aware of some of the possibilities. We'll be back in just a sec. If you haven't yet listened to the Prime Minister's Davos speech, I encourage you to do so. It doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum. His message is for Canadians about Canada. It provides the context for many of the decisions we will have to make as a country in the coming years. Let me know your thoughts on YouTube. Till next time, I'm Carole Taylor.